Afreximbank TV.
Governor, it's great to have you here on Afreximbank TV. Thank you for hosting us here in the Bahamas. You must be immensely proud of what you have achieved here over the past couple of days.
Well, thank you. We're very pleased to have Afri-Caribbean in the Caribbean and to have all of these fine delegates in the Bahamas.
Fantastic. So yesterday, I don't know if you were part of the panel discussion or in the room, but the Afreximbank, about 10 years ago or so, they launched something called the Central Bank Depository Scheme, whereby African central banks, rather than putting their money in US reserves, they actually deposited with the Afreximbank, which helped the Afreximbank ultimately leverage that to then be able to grow its balance sheet. So there's a lot of talk about domestic resource mobilization. So do you think that central banks and other institutions need to think differently about what they do with their reserves to empower our own domestic financial capabilities?
Well, I think what's most important to understand with the Afri-Caribbean initiative is that from a reserves management perspective, central banks decide where they place their reserve based upon the credit quality and strength of the depository institutions, and in the case of Afri-Caribbean being investment grade, that meets one of the most important criteria. And so from that respect, decisions to place reserves with Afri-Caribbean are not very complicated at all. I think what is positive about it is at the same time as central banks have a safe place, a relatively safe place to put their resources, it also provides the liquidity that an entity like Afri-Caribbean can rely on to do productive activities.
And so the Bahamas is known for a thriving financial services sector. So what do you think we can learn from what you guys have done successfully to develop this financial services industry from a regulatory perspective or even from a sort of regulatory framework?
Several things have mattered for the Bahamas. At the present time, we are experiencing some challenges because we have to adjust to a lot of changing global regulatory standards and expectations. But what has been very important for us as an international financial center, first of all, is having a robust regulatory infrastructure that evolved in step with global standards and expectations. That has been very important. We've also continued to have and build up capacity in terms of the supervision and regulation of the financial sector. But I would say that the most important thing that allowed the Bahamas to thrive in financial services and to get substantive benefits has been the fact that we cultivated institutions that had physical presence in the Bahamas, meaning that we got a direct employment and other benefits from those activities. And to be able to accommodate them on shore, we had to have the human capitals. So the Bahamas really, from the outset, invested in building up human capital for the banking sector. And the Central Bank of the Bahamas was very instrumental, some of my predecessors early on, in setting up institutes that provided diploma and certificate courses for young professionals in the banking sector.
So when you talk about young professionals and skills, it's not just obviously financial services, but it's also the lawyers, the accountants.
Lawyers and the accountants especially. And because of that foundation, even when you look at the tertiary education sector in the Bahamas, accountancy and law were one of the two areas, or two of the many areas where very early on the Bahamas was able to have an entirely domestic educational framework where persons can start to finish and get accredited and be in their profession. In some of the other areas where we're still developing tertiary education systems, but that reflects really the importance and the influence of the needs in financial services.
And in terms of, yesterday we had a discussion in terms of building resilience. Ultimately, we're going to be exposed to shocks, whether we like it or not. And shocks is a natural feature of human development or humanity, let's say. So making sure that you've got strong financial institutions is critical in terms of being able to absorb and respond to these shocks. So what's the philosophy from the Bahamas there in terms of having a strong financial services industry, strong capital bases, and strengthening the banking sector?
Well, so for that question, I would look at our domestic financial sector and say that, yes, quality of supervision and regulations do matter. and making certain that the banks have adequate capital buffers. So in the Bahamas, we have very high capital buffers. As a matter of fact, we think that on a medium-term transitional basis, our domestic institutions need to reduce their capital levels because we don't want it to be sitting there idly with the temptation that it could be used for high-risk activities. But beyond that, I believe that to make certain that you have the strong support at the foundational level for your financial services, you have to focus on the resilience in your economy overall. And so it means that to the extent that we can continue to make our economies more resilient to what are going to be increasing climatic events, the volatility. Tourism is a higher volatile sector than some of the other export earning sectors that other countries might rely on. So making certain that we have the resilience in those sectors and activities means that you have a more confident base upon which financial services can grow and thrive. That I think is very important for countries like the Bahamas.
And so right now, I'm assuming this is how it happens when people are transacting between the African continent and the Caribbean. They're probably having to settle through correspondent banks in the US. Yes. So how can we circumvent that issue?
Well, the correspondent banking issue is a vexing concern for small island economies in the Caribbean. And I think when we look at the example of the Pan-African payments and settlement system, by having that multilateral clearing facility where you're focused on having more direct channels for payments, or at least minimizing the amount of individual payments that need to go through the correspondent channel, that I think has the potential to be a very positive and impactful over the medium and longer term. And I think it is a good example of reducing some of the intermediary friction that might happen, particularly if the terminal points of the trade and the transaction are not happening in those markets where our correspondent banks are, then it does add to the layers of cost and sometimes timely delays.
Fantastic. Governor, it's been great having you on Afreximbank TV. Thank you for your time, and good luck with the rest of the conference.
Well, thank you for having me, and welcome to the Bahamas.
Thank you.